Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it may be in your specific locale, as you ingratiate us and rest in community with us as we attempt to grapple with a few intellectual ideas that we plan on executing as soon as possible. I am Larry Fields, and I'm joined this morning, gratefully, by the Dr. Charles Alexander and our Jenga, Mr. Mike Jones, the Mike Jones. And we want to talk a little bit at this time, this morning, about a few things as it relates to Black studies. Uh, the Black studies movement appears to be organic, but it was not. This was something that was shaped and meted out by individuals with intentionality. And so, as we delve into this conversation today, we'd like for you all to appreciate what we're doing and what had happened. What had happened was, in other words, and how that occurred, and that these are things that we are well poised to do today. We have to be intentional, and we also have to put ourselves in the new at the center, in the nucleus of the situation, each individual. These things are not going to be able to be cast upon other individuals. We've got work to do, and we're going to spend our time talking about the work as opposed to reacting to opponents that are acting in a very predictable manner. So as we open this up, Doc, I'd like for you to lead the entree because we're going to rely on our Django. We understand that we have a library with us, and we are going to utilize that library as best we can. And we'll give him load management when he needs it, but he's gonna be a workhorse today. So, Dr. Alexander, go ahead and open us up.
Yes, a couple of things. First and foremost, it is February 1st. So, as we embark upon, Black History Month and, and the great works and contributions and intentions and intentionality of Carter G. Woodson, um, we want to we want to be very intentional about looking back so that we can go forward, right? And and so last week we were having some conversations about the leadership that came from the Black student movements and how that impacted our move forward in in the in the early and mid and latter 60s on into the 70s, and we talked about we talked a bit about the Black Power movement, and we talked a bit about the Black Arts movement, and we talked a bit about the Black Studies movement. And so I thought it would be great to start our what is really going to amount to a month-long homage to Carter G. Woodson and his works with a perspective from the Mike Jones about what it was like to be a young man, in that transition from secondary to post-secondary education, in the midst or in the onset and then subsequently the midst of the Black Studies movement in St. Louis and in the United States in general.
Oh, was that a question? Okay.
Well, it was kind of just what we were trying to go with. So
okay, all right.
If you could, yeah, if you could kind of speak to your experience, that's kind of how we want to frame,
Okay.
shape our conversation today.
Well, I want to, as we've talked about this, and particularly as you were introducing the subject of the approach today, uh, I got to thinking about how fundamentally wrong the current information is about that moment. I mean, it's like people trying to explain bebop from a classical perspective of Berkeley School of Music. Okay, you would have had to talk to somebody who was there when Charlie Parker walked in the door. Okay, and when you hear old guys talk about it, they say the first time they heard Charlie Parker, and the reality is the Black Studies movement and literally everything that kind of went with it was not about diversity, equity, inclusion. What had happened was between the evolution of the civil rights movement, a new generation of Black activists and thinkers began to emerge, and they had a completely different critique of America than Thurgood Marshall, for example. Okay, Thurgood Marshall was a classicist, and I don't mean this negative. He thought the Constitution, the law, Larry, you know a lot more about this and can weigh in on filling that in. But by the time I'm leaving high school, going to college, the Vietnam War is taking off, and we view America as both inherently racist, imperialist, and really a threat and danger to the world if you're people of color. And our identities started to merge with people of color around the world, and not us as Americans. I mean, to this day, I literally don't think of myself. You know, when I hear people talk about America, literally don't feel any of that. Never have, probably never will. I live here. I'm a United States citizen. But that was the impetus of the Black Studies movement. It was the impetus of the Black Power movement. And it had a fundamentally separatist bent. And I don't mean separatist in terms of the Nation of Islam or Marcus Garvey, where people consider that literal separation. But it was an intellectual, philosophical, psychological, cultural separation. So you got Maulana Karenga, he was Ron Karenga then at UCLA, and that's where us started. And our Christmas celebration, you know, the thing when you get 75, man, you can't really short-term memory. We were just talking about it.
Kwanzaa.
Monster, yeah, thank you, man. I was having brain freeze there for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Was not to be integrated into America and Christian Christmas. It was our stuff, okay? Matter of fact, if they didn't show up, it didn't matter. It didn't have to be included, quote, in some kind of collective ceremony. And the whole Black Studies thing was fundamentally based on the premise that what you teach in white universities, per Carter G. Woodson, that you just is not the proper education for Black students, and that there's a different worldview, a different perspective, and we want that taught here for us. And what is what I've always thought was interesting about that time versus this, we never referred to ourselves as minority students, even though our numbers, we were always the minority on these white campuses. We were the Black students, okay? And so whether it was 500 or 50, you were the Black students, and your mentality was not about your numbers, that you were feeding off the energy that was going around the entire country. So, and it was a evolution, major transition from what was the traditional civil rights leadership of the prior 20 years or so in that generation, which was very much designed or kind of philosophically and psychologically committed to getting us integrated and included in America. And the Black Studies movement, the Black Power movement, was more about an assertion of our humanity and our agency here, independent of what white America thought or whatever. So I would say that, for example, you could say Donald Trump is not the first person in America that talked about the politicalization of the FBI and the government. That's what we were talking about in the 60s. So if you take that whole concept, if you ask me then, and just about anybody in the movement then, what was their stance on Vietnam War, for example, and you had radical white students who were against the war, and they were against American involvement in Vietnam. The Black stance was, we support the Vietnamese people's right for self-determination in America. So if somebody were to ask me in 1968, 67, do you oppose the war in Vietnam? My response then, retrospectively, would be now. No, I don't oppose the war in Vietnam. I support the Vietnamese right to kick Americans out of Vietnam. This is, and you supported all revolutionary movements around the world. So my view of a Fidel Castro in 1967 is not the same as a white Cuban of some wealth and privilege who left Cuba. Now, maybe some other Cubans feel it, but in our context, Fidel Castro is a revolutionary hero, while the United States is supporting the Portuguese in Mozambique and Angola, the apartheid government in South Africa. Fidel Castro is supporting Nelson Mandela and the ANC and the freedom fighters in Angola and Mozambique. So for us, Castro is on our side. The United States is an oppressor to people that we consider our organic allies. So the real schism in the Black community in that time was along age, and it really was about how you felt about America and how did you feel about being Black in America, and that was the schism.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Jones. You talked about the critique that you all had of America. You talked about a critique that was a basis. And you also, and not exactly in stating, but it conjures up what the goal in higher education was, or education as a whole. Based on the critique of America, you had one mindset. And based on that mindset, it does not appear that you all went to school solely to solve the problems of white America. And there was no craving to be commingled. You just wanted to take your things there. So as you look at that, what do you think the critique looks like now by in general, present time?
Oh, I think I am a member of the last generation that got a legitimate higher education. As a matter of fact, I think American public education got to be bad on purpose so you wouldn't have working class kids come into college learning how to think at a higher, more critical level. Because literally all of these kids, we was kids, we was 18, 19, we thought we was grown, but my father would have said, well, you was grown, you ain't as smart or mature as you ever gonna be, but you as grown as you ever gonna be right now. And so we were grown in that sense. And we were in a position of learning about the world and history, how to think. So you're exposed to a whole range of thinking. And so literally the object of an undergraduate education was not vocational. It was in time in an economy that if you went to college, you go get a job. It might be in one area that you thought you wanted to work in, but there's nobody that went to college that didn't end up gainfully employed. So the notion of vocation school didn't really exist. You had to major in something, but and you thought, I want to be a high school history teacher and a basketball coach. So if you asked me, but school kind of took me into different places, exposed me to a whole bunch of stuff. And that was everybody. Now, coming from a Black perspective in those times, you kind of took that liberal education in the classic Adolphus Huxley sense of the word, that essay, and you became a first order thinker with a higher intellectual perspective. But you came to college technically prepared. I mean, I would say when I got to university, there were white students with a broader education than I had had in St. Louis public schools. But they were not any technically better prepared to go to college than I was. Okay, their curriculums may have been more expansive. They were exposed to some things sooner, but I was as capable and competent coming from Beaumont High School as anybody that went to Ladue or Country Day. And I think, and that created a whole generation. So if you look at the politics of the 70s and all of that, that's really a function and a shift in the culture at the popular level and the sociological level is all a result of that generation of people, Black and white, who were in college at that time. After that, college now has become vocational training. I mean, you can go to college, graduate, and it can be Harvard or Yale and not have read a single book that mattered. I mean, fundamentally, no matter how bright you may be inherently, you are functionally illiterate because there's a whole canon. I'm not even talking about the whole world. I'm just talking about the Western canon. Because if you read Plato and Aristotle, you're going to have questions, okay? To be in school in the 4 years where you get a chance to explore a whole range of things and then bring your perspective to that, you come away from that totally different, a totally different person. And the other thing is, it didn't cost a lot of money to go to college. You could actually work your way through college. When I went to the University of Missouri, it cost $165 a semester. And out of California, I don't think they paid anything. I'll say so. People used to transfer and go to school. They had a great, matter of fact, they had the best public university system in the world, easily in the country, but maybe the best one in the world. It was an extraordinary time to go, but that was a result uh, 50 years of the New Deal GI programs that let working class guys who went to the army come back and become PhDs, etc. So that public infrastructure, that social infrastructure, created the opportunities to do that. The reason I could go to the University of Missouri is because they finally had a campus in St. Louis in by the late '60s. But that's the same way with the University of Illinois at Chicago Circle, the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. So this is when these state universities started to pop up in dense urban areas that also had large black populations, and the Ivy League colleges and higher end colleges were then even recruiting black students, and so it was just a whole it was just a whole different game. But we came there as children of a civil rights struggle that by the time we got to college, we didn't think that civil rights struggle was militant enough.
Mike, what year did you go? What year did you start high school?
1963, September 1963.
Okay, and so you have all of this stuff kind of going on. So, like, what was it like for you? Boots on the ground. You got King, you got Malcolm, got you lived through the assassination of all three, King, Malcolm, and Medgar. You got you've already mentioned Vietnam. Part of the struggle and part of the identification at that time in the mid and latter 60s for the Black student movements, for the Black Power movements, was also Palestine. Like, what was it like, boots on the ground, as a high school student and college student, as all of those things are going on around you, and you are literally growing up in the movement?
I would say that it's interesting. I think when people write their biography, they write it like they were always enlightening.
Like it was always there.
Yeah, right. And no, you wouldn't. I mean, if you asked me at 14 when I went to high school, what was my issue? A better jump shot, okay? Okay. And how figure out how I was going to get to be a varsity basketball player. Now, that was my pride. That was more important than my grade point average, okay? But you're aware of all of this. You're aware of all of it, and it's part of the organic part of your environment. It's in the air. You hear it. I was always interested in public affairs and reading and stuff, but I mean, the folks you're running with, we doing 15, 16-year-old high school stuff. Okay, so you ask me, basketball and Motown would have been my two priorities. Now, I went to a very good high school, which they were all good at the time. So you're exposed to some stuff. You read some stuff, like you read the Shakespeare and stuff like that. But you just read it for the test. I mean, it is not. It's not taking in. You don't know you're internalizing it at that moment, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the thing that probably resonated with me more than anything that I really did pay attention to, and it sunk in, was the urban revolts of the '60s. Because all through my high school, I mean, it was jumping off every summer. Okay, I mean, there was never, from '64 to '67, there was never a quiet summer. Now, I would suggest that had more of an impact on me than anything else because the notion of resistance at that level made a Dr. King stuff seem to be kind of absurd given who white America is at this time. And that made more sense. That probably would have got us all killed if we had actively pursued it. But the point is, emotionally, that resonated. And so I would say that I never said it like this because the question makes me really think about it. I would say the Black Studies movement in white colleges is really the college expression of the urban rebellions of the mid 60s. So, and matter of fact, I think I could draw a through line between how you felt about that and what you're doing in college by the time you get there. And so it's like, in a lot of Black neighborhoods, we, you know, the brothers and sisters who could go to college, everybody sent them off, but you're still coming from the same streets as the brothers who didn't go. Okay, y'all all part of that same community. So I don't think you can dismiss that. I think more bourgeois Black thinkers and white sociologists would try to separate that urban revolt from these Black student revolts in college campuses. I don't think you can do that.
So what were the streets like in St. Louis as those things were going on everywhere else? There had to be a similar, more proximal type of experience of it as well.
Well, I'd say St. Louis had was more a southern city than a northern city. I mean, people in St. Louis don't think it's South, but St. Louis is really the South. So, matter of fact, we used to have these discussions about everybody that does something with St. Louis. So it's not like St. Louis was not the tip of the spear of by any stretch of the imagination. But it was very much also a part of that. So, you can look at it in a couple different ways. You can look at it a couple different ways, and we were there. You had all the infrastructure of the rest of the country. I would say St. Louis didn't have the intensity of the rest of the country. So if you took the other big cities of the 60s, the Detroits, the Chicagos, the Newarks, the New Yorks, the LA, what was to become the Black Power movement or the Black struggle going forward than St. Louis. So we were, I would describe us as the runt of the litter.
And because you also referenced St. Louis, as the South or as a Southern city, I want to throw in just a quote by William Wells Brown, one of the first Blacks to be published, who was enslaved in the state of Missouri and more specifically St. Louis before he escaped. But just to kind of contextualize St. Louis for folks who don't know, and even for those of us who grew up there, And this is from William Wells Brown. Though slavery is thought by some to be mild in Missouri when compared with the cotton, sugar, and rice growing states, yet no part of our slave holding country is more noted for the barbarity of its inhabitants than St. Louis. And so that is our space. And I know as a native St. Louis and that we ain't really walking around thinking that. When in reality, that's what it is. That's what it was, and that's what it is.
That's what it is, and that is my question based on now what you just read, Doc, and based on what Mike has stated about their critique about imperialism. Um, you know, you could come up with a generation of individuals that were intentional about who they were and that felt totally secure in being in a lane that was self-sufficient and self-edifying. Where we are today, it appears that we are seeking inclusion. And so my question to you, Mike, is based on the foundational rock that you were built on, how in the world could we ever get back to the self-reliance or the same sort of movement or just being that you talked about? And you raised two very, very important issues in terms of the connection between the individual that went to school and the one that stayed in the neighborhood. Both of them had a foundational educational rock that was on par. That is not the case today. How are we going to right size these things or level set these things today, considering what we have?
I think if if I if I had been a better student, I'd have been more of a scholar and an academician. So I can kind of say this. I wouldn't know how to present it or do it, but I think we don't have, and in the 60s, we were struggling with this, but we were doing it. And we kind of understood the nature of the problem. Here's, I think, the crux of our issue is we don't understand or see ourselves as a colony of America. Like these other places, we are a function of American imperialism. We're not in America. We're in the black colony that America owns. And in the 60s, you metaphorically or analogies, I always get them confused. I saw say metaphorically. We were a colony fighting for independence. So that was the mentality of that emerging generation, independence. Just like Vietnam or Mozambique or the brothers in Zimbabwe or South Africa. Same issue. You could literally say this Black in America is a variation of those movements. As a matter of fact, we saw ourselves as the same as those movements, aligned with those movements. So that's who we were too. But we never had the revolutionary overthrow because we used to talk in those terms, okay? So it's not so, for me now, looking back, it's not that, it wasn't so much that literally what you did, but how you talked and thought about it was really what was the foundation of what guided how you acted or interacted with the larger system. And those places, those colonies who actually won their independence through armed resistance took one road. But the colonies that didn't get quite get to that level. And I think South Africa is a classic example of given its condition now. They got trapped by neocolonialism, where the imperial power backs off from overt oppression and goes for subliminal subordination. And so it lets a native ruling class emerge with privileges and basically educated by them for their benefit. So I just told you about, I think the whole nature of college changed after our generation. So it's much more indoctrinated. So believe it or not, I guess me and Trump are agreeing about the indoctrination that's happening. They think in MAGA that it's undermining the white hegemony. I think it's maintaining the white hegemony because they're a little bit too stupid to recognize subliminal influencing of people. So what happens is in neocolonialism, the oppressor allows a native class of elites to emerge, and they have at a superficial level a lot of the privileges and access, and they use them not so much to control, I think, the mass of the native population, but eliminate the leadership from the native class of population, because literally you have to bring something to leadership. There is a level of intellect. I mean, now there are organic, natural, brilliant leaders, but as a general rule, that's why they send officers to West Point. You don't get to be a general because you were just that smart in battle. I mean, somebody has to teach you, train you how to lead. And that usually comes from a smaller group who had some advantages, some privileges. And if they stay connected to their people, you become a psychiatrist like Frantz Fanon, a scholar like Du Bois or Carter G. Woodson or E. Franklin Frazier, or even a Derek Bell. I'll even go one generation and a half younger. But you disconnect that educated, and I'm going to use bourgeoisie in the classic historical Marxist terms. I'm not talking about bougie folks.
Not about the petty bourgeoisie.
Yeah, right. But so you separate them from the masses, and fundamentally, you don't get a Mao Zedong, you don't get a Fidel Castro, you don't get a Huey P. Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael has Brother Touré has a degree in philosophy from Howard University. So you're really talking about a whole different level. And once you separate that, you got problems. And what, Larry? What's the proverb? Where the leaders have no vision, the people perish. When the leaders have no vision, the people perish. And that's what happened to us, or what has happened to us, I think.
That's extraordinary, Mike. How do we get out of this?
That's a hell of a question, my brother. I actually think, and this will sound strange, I think Trump and MAGA America is our way out. And I think it's because they're going to be so bad, and they're going to be but first of all, they are going to take America down to whatever, I don't know. But in that descent into one of Dante's lower levels of hell, we'll have to be different if we're gonna survive. Okay, that uh, I think we'll get forged in the furnace that forged us for 350 years, 250 of slavery, of enslavement, another 100 years of Jim Crow. We are as a people, we are the product of that historical experience. And for 350 years, it was a common historical experience that held us together, that our individual fate was tied to our collective destiny. You couldn't separate it. Okay, and so there was an organic connection between the. We were like wolves. The strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf, as Kipling said. And so it's that organic connection. Yeah, you yourself, but you're also here too. That got broken. That connection has gotten broken as we moved, as America said the easiest way to control us or these colonies is to take your boot off their neck and let them appear to be making progress. Now that's a problem for mediocre second string white boys, okay? Because they ain't got nothing going, but they white and they more superior to us. So as in America had out of necessity of the 50s and the 60s as the world was changing, to order to manipulate or maintain its influence, had to get rid of an apartheid South and the more, you can't be the home of the United Nations and an African ambassador can't get a cab in New York. Okay, I mean, that shit don't work. So they had bigger fish to fry than crackers and worry about crackers in Alabama and Mississippi, and so they basically tossed them aside. Now, basically they are seeing the reaction of ordinary white folks to their loss of status, and I call it the Jackie Robinson reaction. Everybody talks, and we talk about Jackie Robinson integrating baseball and what it did for baseball and how the game has grown, and you got all these great players, and that's cool. And if you Mickey Mantle or Sandy Koufax or Warren Spahn or any of them great white players, hey, it's cool because I'm even greater now because I did what I did against the best players of all time. But don't nobody talk about what happened to the average white boy who was only a major league ball player because it was all white men. Nobody can tell you who the center fielder was for the New York Giants before Willie Mays. I know they had to have one, but I don't know who he was. Now, Duke Snider.
Is that not the existential threat for
that
them
is it.
that we actually are fighting?
Yes, that's it. And that's what we don't understand. And I'll tie it back to our lack of intellectual enhancement that no longer happens. The enhancement of your intellect no longer happens in college. That learning to see the world as a wider, older place with different, to think in nuanced terms, to look past the obvious and see what's the underlying basis for any of this, and then come up with your theory of the case. You guys have heard me say this forever, and that is there's three things a lawyer takes into court: the facts, the law, and the theory of the case. And of the three, the theory of the case is the most important because the facts are going to be the facts. You're going to stipulate to the facts. The judge is going to tell you what the law is. But Larry, what we were talking in the green room, but you got 12 jurors who ain't got a clue. And you have to take something this complicated and then be able to explain it to them in a way that they want to think you're right. That's what it means to develop your intellect at a higher level. They don't teach you in law school how to recite the law. They teach you how to, what is it Professor Kingfield says in paper? Chase, you teach yourself the law. I'll teach you how to think like a lawyer. That's it.
In order to level set, is it not a better question or framing? I mean, because the narrative suggests we ain't gonna get out. Ain't no get out. Yeah. Isn't this more a get through?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I'll put it like this. I think you have to be like the Count of Monte Cristo. I guess that was Devil's Island. I forgot the Count of Monte Cristo's name. And in the story, you know, they're on the island in the prison where nobody ever escapes from. But the old guy that he meets, that was a priest or whatever, forgot what he got worked up about. But the story is about never acknowledging that even though you may never get out, every day you're trying to get out. And and that's where I come from when I say that oppressed people win when they resist.
It's the resistance. It's the resistance.
Not when you're.
We got to get through so we could literally fight another day.
Right.
Larry, that is the nature of this battle.
Right. Larry, you wanted to say something.
I think you all covered it. But because I was talking about the applications, that's what we're supposed to do. You know, take the law and you apply it. You know, none of this operates in a vacuum, and I think that's what's important about the origination of this conversation. We're talking about the Black Studies movement, and when we look at the entire aspect, it was greater than the Black Studies movement, these were things that were applied, and they weren't in a vacuum, and they were not isolated. Now, if we did something along those lines today with the present mindset that we have, the general notion is that we would be looking for integration. You talked about being in a lane that was separate and distinct, taking your culture, taking your mores to the university to have your own distinct department and lane. It was not, as I heard someone misquote what Black History Month was, to share the accomplishments of Black folks with the world and to invite you. That has never been the genesis. That wasn't the genesis. That has never been the intention. The intention is very, very clear. Look at what we did in the last year. Celebrate what we did that was right. Do better what what was wrong, and make a plan for how we're going to go the next 12 months. But we some kind of way have gotten into this notion that we are supposed to share our culture with the world for 1 month and teach them about this history.
And if we do that, they'll treat us better.
They will see our humanity.
Right. So that's kind of that's the failed thinking. I mean, I do believe that that a part of the intentionality was to literally speak us into existence. I do believe that was a part of Carter G. Woodson's intention, but I also believe that it was to help us to be grounded in that space and understand that in spite of whatever the enemy was saying or not, that we, because we needed to know that we exist, that we existed, and that we exist, and that we will exist. We needed to know that, and that was foundational. And then beyond that, you just have you really the counter narratives are as much a reflection of the miseducation of the Negro as anything else. So those fools who are still running around here talking about, oh, and they only gave us a month, and those are people who ain't never read, right? So anybody who attributes Black history to either cynical white folks or some well-wishing white folks are miseducated Negroes. They who the book is about.
I think there's, I want to go back to something I just said to something I said earlier as we were talking. The goal of being literate and educated. The Count of Monte Cristo was an interesting story about a lot of stuff. And we just talked about being in the resistance. Always say, I'm here, but I'm never going to recognize that I can't get out. I'm working every day to get out. But you got to have read the Count of Monte Cristo. Okay, I mean, at some point in they give you the book, and probably if you're in high school, you don't know why you're particularly reading it. But as you mature and your thinking and your intellect develops, you can refer to that. Alexander Dumas, whose father was Black and famous general, literally, if I wanted to teach a lesson on the importance of unity and solidarity for being successful and overcoming extraordinary odds, I'd have high school kids read the Three Musketeers, okay? Because if you think about the Musketeer motto, all for one, one for all. Now that takes, we come up with all these highfalutin, we got these intellectual, but literally that's it. And it's fiction, and he knows something about French history, but the whole point is their ability to overcome extraordinary obstacles or odds was a function of their philosophy. All for one, one for all. And then have a conversation with Black kids about what that means. First of all, it's a hell of a story. I watch all the Three Musketeer movies because I don't care how many times you've seen them. They're just a great story. So you can take something like that, and then if you are truly teaching, translate that into something that even has higher meaning. And then you can have a discussion. Is that what Alexander Dumas was trying to talk about, or do you have a different idea? But no matter what his idea, this is an idea you can take from that and explore. But if you don't know who the brother was, ain't never read it, then how could you have a discussion about what that might mean to us and you if you ain't never, if your exposure to a level of intellectual thinking or literature or music, they have to listen to some music you couldn't dance to. Okay, that you really had to think about what somebody's playing and what are they trying to get done, so that you can see the complexity in what a John Coltrane or Charlie Parker or Louis Armstrong did, and equate that to the complexity of a Bach or Beethoven or Mozart. So you have produced, matter of fact, literally the only contribution America has ever made to world culture is black music. Okay, literally the only thing that the whole world studies that's indigenous to America is jazz. Nothing else here is anybody particularly interested in. Do they copy? But they copy that. They want to know that. And the white guys in Europe, in London, England particularly, would tell you their inspiration was black blues musicians. Okay, so you got something already. I don't know nothing about hip hop, but we changed popular music for the world. So somebody's got to tell you how profound that is and what that literally could mean and who you are in the world. We mentioned this, Gerald mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, how we don't understand our importance to the rest of the world. That Black America, even in our current condition, is the largest. Okay, I'm sorry. Black America in our current condition is still the most highly educated, largest group of people of the African diaspora here and any place else, and the most urban. And so the world looks to us to see what it ought to be doing at a cultural level. Ain't nobody following white people in America.
So we are probably the most educated, but we are not the largest. But we might be the largest.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
I mean, we're the largest that can function at this level.
That's this level, correct?
Right.
Correct. But I think it's in the context of that statement which you bring forth, like, is why Carter G was doing what Carter G was doing. I think that is why we had the Black Studies movement, right? Was to posit those things in a way that they could be leveraged in order for us to get through. Because we not, whatever this is, we ain't gonna get out of it because we ain't gonna leave.
Right.
We staying here. And so in mass, we not going nowhere.
Well, we ain't got no place to go in mass.
We ain't got nowhere to go in mass, which is
right.
And so we're gonna be constantly figuring out how to get through. But where we are also kind of where we are misperceiving, where we are not necessarily reading the tea leaves, this is the Reconstruction. So if we were not doing what we need to be doing, there would be no need to roll back anything that suggests that it facilitates our doing it. There would be no need to roll back DEI if these things weren't successful. There would be no need to try to label every, public failure of any manifestation of the United States as somehow being related to the implementation of DEI. The reason that there is an assault on all of these things, including the federal government, as the federal government has been as ratchet as the federal government is, because ultimately it is made up of white supremacists, because we have you to go back to an earlier point in the conversation, because we have used protest and the law, and our work, and we have persevered, we have succeeded. And because we've done that, the enemy finds it necessary to roll back. So we have to attack the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have to dismantle the federal government, because the federal government was a lever for middle class attainment for Black folks. That's what this is about. And for us to say it's anything other than that is foolish.
Right. But Charles, here is, I think you're right, but here's an important difference, I think. You can learn from the past, but you don't live in the past.
You don't live there. Right.
You live going forward.
Correct.
But the lessons are from the past. That I would argue the election of 2016 and this one in 2024 are analogous to the election of 1876. Okay? And I would suggest that what Trump MAGA is doing is analogous to the rollback of Reconstruction. And the reason that was necessary, because Reconstruction actually worked. Okay? It worked, to your point. But what they could do with 100 years of Jim Crow, they could do, because we were 12% of the population and they were 85% of the population. It was a overwhelmingly, predominantly white country. So they could make it all white and keep us out, and it had no impact. The country ain't all white no more. And it's a lot more developed and sophisticated. And these dumbass white folks, they ain't got enough. The reason you got to have integrated basketball and baseball, because you ain't got enough white players to play at that level. I mean, just the numbers, you can't produce the numbers to maintain the infrastructure and the status quo. So they have a dilemma. In order to accommodate the marginalized white base that makes them a white power, they have to dilute their capitalist capacity with on the human resources side. So Elon Musk is as much a Nazi racist as Bull Connor, but he for H1
the visa.
The visa, yeah. He said, because what he's saying is you ain't got no white folks here. We gonna have to get, so at the same time that they're doing this, kicking people out the country, they want to bring them in. So they have an inherent contradiction that's unsustainable, in my opinion. Now I don't think it's gonna collapse next week, but I don't think it can hold up another 50 years. And I would suggest this: if Donald Trump is the best white folks got, they've already lost. Now I don't know what day the game. If I was coaching us and we playing him, and somebody say, well, they got a lead now. I say, stay in their ass and they'll fold. Okay, he can't get it done. If that's the best white folks got, they have lost.
I want to revisit that coming out aspect, and I agree that we do not have the wherewithal to come out physically, but there is a mental mind state that many of us are in America, that if we change our ideology, it'll be fine.
Right.
Because all of those programs that you mentioned, Dr. Alexander, they were mentioned for the benefit of Black folks. I'm sorry, they were created for the benefit of Black folks. But we are under this illusion that we are Americans by and large. We are not the Black colony that we have spoken of earlier today. And that mindset is crippling. It is just as crippling as the alleged statements that Harriet Tubman made. You know, I would have freed X number more, and I'm quoting at this point, had they known that they were enslaved. And you know, we have too many people that, number one, don't realize the indoctrination. I don't think the vast majority of us understand the
Right.
indoctrination that we have suffered because it has just been so natural and foundational.
Well,
Uh,
that's what Naeem Akbar, talks about, and change the imagery of psychological slavery. And so, I mean, but again, we got black folks, you know, driving Teslas, talking about they're not going to shop at Walmart. I mean, so
I'm not getting rid of my Tesla though, man. I already made the commitment, but before I knew he was crazy. Man, we got to be critical about this movement now.
I mean, this is
I do
the
not have.
nature of things.
I do not have a Tesla.
This is the nature of things, and so, so we are a part of the resistance, meaning the level set, and we have to continue to do what we do to put these things on people's minds, because there are many people who think this, who believe that they are in isolation, that nobody else is thinking this, and so for them we're a respite, right? There are other people who ain't never heard it, right? For them we the light. And so, we are a manifestation of the resistance. And so we just have to continue to free folks, to free minds, because this is what it looks like. This is what the fight looks like. And and again, when we look at when we look at that period of time that we're talking about, all of those things are on the table today. All of that stuff is still on the table today, and we're still having to kind of find our way relative, to those things, or relative to have a relative stance, perspective on those things. Now, here, and then we see that there was some rightly focused perspective that lacked in strategy. So for those of us who thought it right to punish Kamala Harris because, as the vice president, she was she was part and parcel of the genocide occurring in Palestine. So they decided not to vote for her because of that. That's a bad strategy because now you got this, right? And so for some of them, they need it for, like in the wake of the election, some of them need it for the results to be mischaracterized, so they could say she was going to lose anyway. But the fact of the matter is that many of them are the reason why she lost by 1%, less than 2 percentage points, is because that was bad strategy. Because you can't negotiate with this. You at least could have negotiated with her and her cabinet. You can't negotiate with this. All we can do now is react and respond, right? And so that's what we got.
So I'm going back to your strategy concept, and I'm saying the strategy needs to be for the long game.
Absolutely.
And I would suggest you know, uh, uh, when I thought we was gonna have a revolution in the '60s when I was in college, I was a big reader of Mao, Ho Chi Minh, basically the principles of guerrilla warfare. And we'll always be the insurrectionist, the guerrilla. So what Mao stole from Sun Tzu is basically when the enemy is powerful or strong, you pull back. The biggest mistake we could make now is to get into active resistance. You ought to give them every opportunity to do the damage they're going to do and fail. Because what they're going to do is go disrupt the lives of a whole lot of white folks. Now, our lives are always disrupted, okay? So we just got to learn to be black again, okay? And allow them to do the damage that they're going to do and undermine themselves. So,
and we've seen that.
And so I'm
already.
saying, I would call, my advice to us would be, let's retreat to the hills, make ourselves scarce, and see how they are going to do it. So you'll know how to attack. You want to figure out where the weaknesses are going to emerge, where's the stuff, and they're not smart people. They are clever, they're mean and evil, but they ain't smart, okay? Because smart people never would have picked him, okay? And they're stuck with him, okay? So I would suggest that we take their ignorance, their arrogance, and their incompetence and make them our allies. So rather than resist them, let them run amok. And when they tear the place up, that's when you launch your attack. You don't want to fight. You don't want to confront them on a battlefield where you're outnumbered. Okay, you want to make it.
In the words of Denzel in Training Day, they too strong. We're not doing that anymore.
We're not doing that. That's it. Okay?
They too strong.
Right now, they're too strong. Give them a chance to get weak. And that's thinking, but if you never read Sun Tzu, if you didn't read Mao, because somebody told you can't read Mao because he's a communist.
Is he a communist?
Yeah, well, okay.
When all of your principles suggest that they're communistic in nature.
Right. So my point is, that's what it means to think about it. The other thing that we need to get straight, we desperately need to get straight, is all of these programs that you see, from affirmative action to the Black Studies program, you name it. This was not the largesse of white America. These were concessions they had to make to Black power. Okay? All of these were demands that they couldn't resist in the moment when we were that strong. And then we got lazy and soft. And I wrote in a column once, referencing The Wire, that the problem with our politics is, by the time you get to the third generation, people inherit stuff. So nobody and if you never fought for any corners or saw corners fought for, you don't know if you had to fight. If you don't know you had to fight to get them, you don't know you got to fight to keep them.
Yeah, well, you don't know.
You don't know. So we think this shit was here because it's supposed to be here because we're right. I tell people all the time, being right and $5 will get you a small cup of coffee at Starbucks. So nobody gives a shit about you being right. The world works on who's got the power versus who ain't got it.
Who got the goods?
That's it.
Okay.
ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for tuning in. And if you are viewing this on YouTube, put your comments in the chat. Until next week, if it's the Lord's will, we're signing off at the level set, and we look forward to seeing you extremely soon.